No one is finally dead until the ripples they cause in the world die away. Until the clock wound up, winds down, and the wine she made has finished its ferment. Until the crop they planted is harvested. The span of someone's life is only the core of their actual existence. Welcome to the Fluff and Hammer. Roll the music.
Yeah, appropriate.
Very much so.
Given what we're talking about this evening.
Very much so.
It's an odd thing, isn't it? There is a melancholy inherent now, isn't there? It's a strange feeling. I mean, I actually did read the last Discworld book last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an experience. That was very, very intense for me anyway.
It's an odd one. I still haven't. It's almost like if I haven't read it, there's still more.
Yeah.
And it's not done, it's not finished, and that journey hasn't come to an end. And
what I loved about it more than anything, how quiet it was. Like, it's not some big epic where the metaphysics of the Discworld is wrapped up and you know, all the storylines come to an end. It's nothing like that at all.
No.
It's actually about, I mean, it reminded me, bizarrely, more than anything of listening to David Bowie's album Black Star.
Yes.
You know, how that is a meditation by a person who is dying and is aware of the fact.
Yeah.
That's exactly what this book is. It's exactly what this book is.
It's a strange one because Raising Steam was kind of the big hurrah book. That was the one where we get way ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah.
Raising Steam was the big hurrah book that said goodbye to everybody.
Yeah.
Which at the time it was obvious it was missing one Granny Weatherwax.
Well,
and she got the goodbye that she deserved because, for all intents and purposes, Granny Weatherwax is Terry Pratchett. You know?
She's the author insert character, isn't she?
Yeah. Whilst, you know, characters like Sam Vimes and more than I can count, really, they all have parts of Pratchett.
I've always felt that Rid Cully had quite a fair old bit of Pratchett in him too.
Yeah, well, Rid Cully is Pratchett's youth, isn't he? That's where it is. The common sense. Why the hell are you running towards danger? You know.
Yeah. And also, I mean, what I love about Rid Cully as well is he's that, and he's also like the ignorance that comes with age as well. You know, the assumption of knowing that you thinking that you know everything when in fact you don't.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant too. The fact that he was able to acknowledge that in his writing was fantastic. I mean, that's something I notice about Pratchett all the time. Going back to him now, when I go back to him now, it's a very different experience from reading him when I was like a teenager or when I was a younger man. He was so aware of things in a way that a lot of older writers are not.
Absolutely.
He sort of tapped into like youth culture and youth movement, but in a sincere way, in the manner of someone who remembered what it was like.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at things like Only You Can Save Mankind, Bomb, you know, there's a real sense of not just thinking about what it was like to be a kid in your own lifetime, but also being very aware of what it is to be a kid at that time in the early 90s. And he draws on so much that was happening at that time that me, when I was 11, which I think is when I read Only You Can Save Mankind, it felt like a comfortable position to be in. I knew what was going on. I knew how these people, the way they talked, the way they acted, the way they thought. And of course, as I've said multiple times, Only You Can Save Mankind, in this great big story that is very much The Last Starfighter, it takes time to find darkness and the humanity in day-to-day life in a way that staggers me to this day.
It's amazing, actually. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. What he dares to do is talk to adolescents and teenagers as though they are people, as though they are actual complex people with ambiguities, with difficulties. And he doesn't do what a lot of adult writers writing for that demographic do, which is try to pigeonhole them based on his own assumptions, biases, and agendas. He talks to them as one of them, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. But
And I
there's
love that. I absolutely love that. He respects the emotional complexity, but also the fact that they are wider creatures, they are wider beings, they exist in political and socio-cultural dynamics that he acknowledges, you know?
Oh, absolutely. There's a wonderful quote actually in I think it's either Equal Rights or Lords and Ladies,
Mhm.
and it's why talk to children as if they're children? They're automatically good at that.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great quote, isn't it? It's a
Yeah.
brilliant quote. I mean, I read actually for a different podcast, I actually reread Only You Can Save Mankind quite recently and went on from that to reread all of the Johnny books. And I was just staggered by it. I was staggered by bearing in mind this is a book that's aimed at young teenagers, you know, sort of like adolescents, people who are sort of like 11, 12, moving into like high school and whatnot.
Mhm.
And it acknowledges so much about the world of being a working class child in the 1990s UK.
Yeah.
I like the grimness of it, the deprivation of it, the automatic violence and anxiety of it. I was staggered by that. I almost couldn't believe it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the Johnny books, in of themselves, they do a really good job of sneaking in the message.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong, by the time you're halfway through each of those books, the message is about as
It's
simple as a brick to the face.
It's
But
fairly clear, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
fairly clear. And you know what? I mean, the irony is, in the 90s, that was what was expected of writers of Pratchett's caliber. You would expect someone like him to be of that particular politics. These days, we've slid so far backwards in the UK ideologically. He would be condemned for it. He would be called like, oh, lefty, woke, blah, blah,
yeah,
blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? It's so
absolutely.
bizarre, isn't it? It's
It,
so bizarre to think how far backwards we've slid. I mean, were he
yeah,
still alive now, he would be the angriest man
absolutely.
imaginable.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is something I was going to bring up at some point. Anyhow, the Pratchett's got this facade of the twinkly grandfather of
He
British
was
literature,
so not that.
but no, the behind that paper thin mache of a shield, there was rage like you have
Absolute
never seen.
fury. Fury. I mean, if you read books like Jingo, for example,
Yeah,
it just comes through, doesn't it? The absolute anger
yeah,
that he has with our status quo, with the way things are.
yeah.
It's unbelievable. It comes through ironically in some of those author insert characters like Granny Weatherwax, you know,
Mhm.
who has this distance and this fair degree of contempt for the world in which they operate,
Well,
you
you just
know?
look at Granny Weatherwax talking to anybody of religion,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and you see where Pratchett's coming from. And
Mhm.
in all honesty, and I say this without a hint of irony or hyperbole, Pratchett's writing formed a lot of my thinking.
Well,
You
yeah, I think that's true of a lot of us, to be honest. What tends to happen, certainly of people of our generation and people who were sort of our ilk when we were kids and teenagers, you know, the
know? Mhm.
slightly outcast, geeky kind who were raised on C.S. Lewis and Alan Garner and J.R. Tolkien, you know, the classic fantasists. We tend to be obsessed by that kind of fantasy, the sort of high fantasy with elves and dwarfs and whatnot, the classic mythological fantasy up to a point. Then we start to get exposed to people like Pratchett, and it changes the topography of our minds quite profoundly.
Yes, absolutely does. And what's interesting is it's not that I have followed his way of thinking. It's that I learned from a very early age to question and to take time in forming a response and to forming a opinion.
That's it, isn't it? It's not necessarily, I mean, because Pratchett, ironically, despite the fact that his books are entirely ideological, they always have a very specific agenda behind them.
Yeah.
They are not didactic. That's the clever thing about them. They don't finger wag. They don't try to impose Pratchett's own very particular politics on the reader. They provide arenas in which questioning occurs, and it's really clever. Given the fact that almost all of Pratchett's books are aimed at young adults and older children, it's a phenomenally clever and respectful thing to do for your audience, especially when you consider that he's coming from a tradition which doesn't do that. Classically doesn't do that. It is the tradition of C.S. Lewis in many respects. And of course, it's that tradition which very much did try to program children with very particular agendas and ideologies. In a way, Pratchett is coming out of that tradition and is also a reaction to it.
You take something like The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents. Right? Mm-hmm. On its surface, it is a book that is a pastiche of the Pied Piper by forming the idea that it's a giant, great big con, and the rats and the piper are in cahoots, which is in of itself, that's a wonderfully silly and genius idea.
Yeah, right.
It then adds in man's brutality to man.
Yeah.
What happens in small town places where people aren't looking too closely at what the people in power are doing, and a darkness like I have never seen when it comes to the Rat King. It's an incredible experience because at no point does it just turn.
No, and it's consistent throughout Pratchett's writing.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, that's what makes the Discworld books in particular so rich, isn't it? It's the fact that you can enjoy them on multiple different levels, but all of the different levels also work together beautifully. It's not the fact that the darkness is undercut by the comedy or the comedy is undermined by the darkness. They work together; they're part and parcel. So you can have books like The Hogfather, for example, which ideologically is one of my favorites, I've got to say. I think ideologically, Pratchett describes in that book my own metaphysics, which I think is beautiful. It's in that speech that Death gives at the end of the book, which is Blakean. It's romantic. He talks about humanity exists at that point where the rising ape meets the falling angel.
I think you've got yourself a book there where the Grim Reaper becomes the Santa Claus, Father Christmas, and he goes around getting it wrong in an era of comedies, and then out of nowhere you get hit with, as if it was some kind of pink pill, no, humans need fantasy to be human, to be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape.
Exactly, and then you've got that wonderful thing, which I think is fucking brilliant, where throughout the book, the whole the threat is that if the Hogfather doesn't deliver the presents on Hogswatch, then the sun will not rise the next day. And that is true to a degree. Because all that would have happened, as Death points out, is a mere ball of flaming gas would have illuminated the earth.
Yes.
What he's saying there is that things like the Hogfather, like Father Christmas, lend poetry to being. Stories, mythology, lend humanity and poetry to existence, where otherwise it would be arid. It would be nothing.
That,
It's brilliant. I mean, it's romantic metaphysics. It's Pratchett expressing the metaphysics of the Romantics. It's Pratchett doing William Blake. And it's fantastic. I mean, it's a beautiful way of doing it. It's a postmodern take on Blake, and it's wonderful. And that, again, is something you get from Pratchett all the time. He unconsciously, it's not a conscious thing that he does, he smuggles in references and gateways to wider reading.
Yeah. It really does. It's all right. If we take Good Omens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good Omens is just William. It's just William by the way of the fucking Omen of all things,
Oh,
right?
and also, of course, let's not forget it's the Satanic Verses.
And the Satanic,
I
yes,
mean, it's Salman Rushdie's
yeah,
Satanic Verses right down, like, it's because, of course, you have to bear in mind at the time of writing Good Omens, the whole Satanic Verses, the whole thing,
explosion,
it was
yeah.
there, it was happening then and there, and Good Omens was very much a response to that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And within that, there is more lessons in what it is to be human by a cast of characters that aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a absolutely mind-blowing experience when he's using these little touchstones that you may not know just William, but you know of it. You know enough of its cultural impact for it to make sense. The Omen, you may not know it even as a kid, you may not know it, but you know enough of the cultural impact that it's made for it to make sense. And you can follow these little lines. Within those lines, there are throwaway moments, there are footnotes, there are gags, there are references. And for fuck's sakes, in one of the most powerful bits of Feet of Clay, he makes a RoboCop joke.
Yeah,
And
he's lampooning meta narrative. I mean, that's what he is the master of. He is able to perceive in a very acute way, in a way very few other writers of his genre and of his ilk can. The assumptions that exist within culture, he knows what we as readers will just naturally know because the imagery, the stories are just so embedded in culture. And he takes those meta narratives and he pulls them about like wet toffee. He stretches and distorts and parodies them. He changes them into slightly different but still recognizable shapes. It's a beautiful thing that he does. It really is fantastic. So like the early Discworld books, the very early Discworld books are all takes on very pervasive traditional fantasy tropes and archetypes and structures and inversions of them. I mean, the Color of Magic, obviously, the very first Discworld book, it's wholly that, right?
Yeah.
It's Tolkien inverted and lampooned and parodied.
I was going to say, The Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic are parody, and they don't have a lot of what happens later in his writing to them. They are just simple, out-and-out parody. Obviously, he wrote them as a way of getting books out. So,
yes.
Yeah. But then you come to Equal Rights. No, not Equal Rights. What's the third one?
Interesting Times?
No. It's Equal Rights. The one with the... Hang on, I'm going to have to get this right.
Equal Rights is the one with Esk. It's the one that introduces Granny Weatherwax.
Yeah, so it is. That's the right one. Yeah, it is Equal Rights. For some reason, I was getting Equal Rights and Witches Abroad in my head.
Because Nanny Og and Magrat are not in Equal Rights, of course.
Of course not.
They haven't turned up yet as characters. And Granny is she's not entirely, but a slightly different character in Equal Rights. She hasn't quite baked yet.
No, she's still very... The core of her personality is there.
Yeah.
But the outskirts aren't quite hardened. The diamond hasn't been sharpened enough.
No, she's more of an archetype in that book, interestingly. She is much more of an archetype, whereas most of it is told from the perspective of the child of Esk.
Yes, that's right. And Esk... The way Esk kind of goes into the story and starts playing around with the entirety of, but why is it always men?
Well, it's feminism. I mean, this is Pratchett like introducing one of the very simple things that he does in these books, which is the way a lot of Discworld books start. Interestingly, like from conception, is what if you had Lord of the Rings with feminism?
Yeah.
What if you had... It's so brilliant, right? It's so brilliant. What if you had, I don't know, Macbeth, but it was set in like a real world, like a fantasy, a real world with real people who just completely defeated all of like the bollocks about fate and like predestination and whatnot, who didn't take it seriously at all. It's quite fun, right? What if you had a classic fantasy adventure, but the guy who was predestined to go on it didn't want anything to do with it?
Oh, my favourite one, of course, is what happens after the adventures dry up.
Yeah.
With Cohen the Barbarian.
Yeah,
who
right.
is one of my favourite characters that Pratchett ever wrote. Because Cohen is a lot of different things all in tandem. He is the fear of getting old and being forgotten. He is the fear of infirmity.
Yeah.
He is the memories of what you were once capable of doing.
Well, he also represents that very strange thing which Pratchett does all the bloody time as well, which is he's outside the bounds of the fairy tale.
Yes.
So it's like, what happens after? That's what Pratchett's always thinking, it seems to me. He's like, I'm not going to be bounded by what's on the page. I want to know, like, after Belle and the Beast get married, what happens after? When Belle realizes that she fell in love with the Beast, and the Beast realizes that he was much happier being mythic and powerful as a monster.
Yeah.
What happens then? And that's the core of a lot of the Discworld books. It's where the stories come from. It's him wondering and introducing real life complexities into things,
Yeah. Well, you've hit the nail right on the head there. It's the introduction of a real life complexities. It is, people are not simple.
No.
People are a collection of neuroses and wishes and dreams. And
what I love about it is, for Pratchett, that is a point of genuine contention. He has, although he clearly loves fantasy and he clearly is well versed in it and mythology and fairy tales, he is also very aware of the evils of those archetypes and traditions as well. So you get books like Witches Abroad, for example, where the villain is literally the fairy godmother. The villain is the character that is trying to make the fairy tale work and not understanding that people are not characters in a fucking fairy tale.
Yeah. Well, there's the most important thing that Pratchett hammers home, and this is one of the most important lessons I took from his books.
Yeah.
People are not things.
Yes.
The moment you start treating people as things, you've lost the basic humanity that you were born with.
I mean, I think, morally speaking, I think Witches Abroad is probably my favorite in that regard. I think it's probably my favorite because the way he pulls that double bluff, the way, like, you are following what in a fairy tale would be the Wicked Witch.
Yes.
Granny Weatherwax in any fairy tale would be the Wicked Witch character, whereas her sister would be the fairy godmother, the one granting the wishes, the one trying to make the fairy tale come true, which appeals to a kind of sentimental narcissism in our culture, right? And Pratchett knows this. He knows this. And it's brilliant. It's the fact, again, that this book is aimed at children and at young adults, and it's talking to them in this very complex way. It's anarchist in a way. It's telling them, all of those fairy tales and stories and moral fables that you're told as kids, they're bullshit. They're utter wankery, and they are poisoning your mind in certain ways. You need to be able to think outside that box. You need to think outside those boundaries. Otherwise, you are going to become a bad person.
Yeah. Exactly that.
It's wonderful, isn't it? It's kind of wonderful.
Well, Lily is a terrifying concept, Lily Weatherwax.
Yeah.
Because she is doing evil because she thinks it's good.
Yeah, she thinks she's the good guy, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's it. She believes it in the very core of her being. She believes that the actions she has taken are the correct option.
Yeah.
And that it's a form of extremism, which absolutely terrifies me to my core.
It's a romantic, sentimental extremism, which is a core of much evil in our societies, I will say, on a wider cultural level. I mean, for me, what Lily expresses is narcissism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the real life expression of it you will find today in the postmodern world is when you go on someone's Twitter or Facebook, and when they're full of like prescribed sentimental phrases.
Yeah.
Or like pictures of puppies and shit like that, stories that are overly sentimental. I tell you now, dear listener, those people you should stay away from. They are bad people. They are going to be narcissists or worse. I guarantee it. Narcissists, abusers, like emotionally manipulative people love that shit.
Yeah.
They love it to bits.
Live, laugh, love.
Oh, yeah.
Or as I like to call it, livecraft, laughcraft, lovecraft.
Yeah, they do. And this is the thing that Pratchett is acknowledging. It's the fact that people are complex. And he's using fantasy as a way of blowing that apart, because traditionally in fantasy deals with archetypes. It doesn't deal with characters. I mean, you look at the Lord of the Rings, there's no characters in Lord of the Rings, barring some maybe Gollum. That's it. Gollum's the only real character in it. All of the others are archetypes without complexity, without any shades of grey to speak of, to be honest.
Because they follow on from the idea of the saga and the
yes. I mean, and don't get me wrong, that's not a condemnation of Tolkien. That's what Tolkien was trying to do.
Yeah.
Within the kind of fiction that he's trying to tell, that's what you do. That's what you deal in, right? It's high mythological. It's traditionally mythological. Of course it deals with archetypes because that's what mythological stories do. What Pratchett is doing is taking that same archetype and introducing real psychology into it, and real politics into it, and real philosophy into it, and exposing the problems with it when you try to apply it to a real world setting.
Yeah.
Or to real people, in your interactions with real people. That's what I remember being so struck by the Discworld when I first read it. Because I was really young when I was introduced to Discworld, like really young. I had grown up with the classic fantasy stuff, with I first learned to read before I went to school with the Chronicles of Narnia. I read them all before I went to school, and then I moved on to Tolkien, and I've devoured that. Loved Tolkien to bits for a goodly portion of my childhood. That was the book for me, The Lord of the Rings. I read that 12 times when I was a kid.
Skipping the songs.
and the appendices. And then I remember it. I can actually remember where I was. I can remember it. Such sensory detail. I picked up, when you do that as a kid and you obsess about the things that inspire you.
Yeah.
I would go to the library and get whatever was on the shelves around Tolkien. Because I thought, well, I'm going to enjoy this. So it was, I would get stuff like David Gemmell and Raymond E. Feist and...
where you sit there going, these are the same books again and again and again.
Yeah, exactly. Anne McCaffrey, The Dragons of Pern, all
That's
of that
different,
stuff.
yeah.
I was so, I was introduced to all of that stuff via that. But the one that I picked up that changed a lot of that was this dog-eared library copy of Interesting Times, which was the first Discworld book I ever read. And I remember bringing it home, starting it, sitting in a chair. It was a school holiday. I think it was an autumnal holiday of some sort, so I had all day to read it. I sat in a chair in my living room, and I remember sitting there and laughing out loud, which I'd never done at a book before. I'd never laughed out loud at a book before. A book had never made me laugh out loud before. And I read it from cover to cover in one sitting. Just devoured it, because I'd never come across anything like it before. It was the first experience of that kind of fiction. And after that, I just wanted everything. I wanted all the Discworlds, which I then devoured just completely, glutted on the damn things. Which, of course, had the effect of changing my appetites and my outlook and the kind of fiction that I was attracted to. It happened very slowly, very gradually, and without any conscious movement. I didn't realize it was happening, but it was. It was moving me away incrementally from the Tolkien-esque fiction that was my way in.
Yep.
and towards the more ambiguous, the more complex, the more adult fiction that would take over later.
It's interesting that you came to Interesting Times as a
Yeah.
first one, because Jesus Christ, that's a dense one to start
That's a
with.
dense one to start with, isn't it? And also, what I liked about it was because that is one of the very few Discworld books where you do have to have read the others before it. You
Yeah.
have to have read The Colour of Magic, otherwise you don't know what's going on. I hadn't, and so I came in sort of part way through Rincewind's story,
Mhm.
and that was interesting too. That I
Yeah.
found fascinating as well. It gave me this sense of a wider world happening beyond the bounds of this book, one that I then wanted to go and learn more about.
So the first time you're introduced to Rincewind ever in your life,
Yes.
he's in a desert island,
Yep.
and some Amazons come up to
Yeah.
him, and all he wants is mashed potatoes.
Yes, and
That must have been
the luggage is already part of the story, no explanation of that, and it's like, yeah, it was amazing. It's a bit like, you know, if you started playing the Monkey Island series with The Curse of Monkey Island.
Yeah,
It's like,
absolutely it is, yeah.
why the fuck is this guy out in the ocean on a roller coaster car? You know, what's going on there?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it was a strange experience, but I'm kind of glad it happened. I'm kind of glad it happened that way.
Yeah.
Like I said, it really intrigued me about this world. I wanted to know more about it. I wanted to expand out into it. And that also happened with the other running stories in the Discworld canon. So, you know, the fact you can separate most of the Discworld books into distinct categories. So you've got the Rincewind books, you've got the Witches books, you've got the Death books, you've got the Watch books, and then you've got the incidental ones like Small Gods and Moving Pictures that kind of stand on their own.
Small Gods actually is a really interesting one, because I love Small Gods. I think Small Gods is a masterpiece.
In terms of how clever the Discworld books are, in terms of the ideas they tackle, Small Gods is probably one of the best. I mean, it's the way it talks about faith. It's a meditation on faith. It's a meditation on reason and on religion and ways of perceiving the world is masterful. But also for me, for my particular background and the way I view the world, which is always going to be mythological. I'm a mythological person. That's my input. That's the way I view reality in narrative terms.
Yeah.
This is the book because it plays with universal, very ancient mythological imagery.
It does, and I mean the fucking eagle and the tortoise.
The Eagle and the Tortoise, one of the, you know, ancient stories. Ancient stories and images going on here.
It's one of those weird things that my first book was Lords and Ladies.
Wow, again, that's so you came in one of the more horror-based Discworld books.
It's a really weird one, and the story is that I had chickenpox, right? And I just read Conrad 1 and the first two Conrad Warhammer books, right?
Right.
And my mum said to me, "I'm going to go into town. Do you want me to pop in the bookshop and get you anything?" I was like, "If you can find it, can you get me the third Conrad book, Warblade?" Right. And she went, "Okay, right," wrote it down. Off she went. She came back, "Well, I couldn't find that one, but I found you this." Which I thought might interest you. I was talking to the lady behind the counter, and she said that this was a really good book. So, all right, okay. So I was, all right, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And I started reading it. Now, I had chickenpox, as I say. So, as you can imagine, my mental state is a little bit blah, 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 blah. And can you imagine what reading that fucking book does to you?
when you're in like a feverish state of mind, it's a good state to read it in. Actually,
it's a beautiful state
because it is, and it's one of the more slightly hallucinogenic Discworld books, anyway.
Oh yeah,
you know, it plays with like different realities and the images of the elves sort of sifting through from their reality. Very cool, very cool stuff.
I mean, the freaking elves, you think of elves in anything that isn't Celtic folklore, and you've got a certain Tolkien look in your head.
Absolutely. I mean, that Lords and Ladies really is, it's Pratchett kind of having a go at Tolkien in many respects. You know, it's sort of taking the Tolkien-esque idea of the elves and in exposing some of like the real problematics of it.
He does two things with the elves, and they're amazing. One, he gets right into the wordplay that he so enjoyed doing, and often his wordplay isn't just to get a joke; it is to get a response.
Yeah,
and when
he's
it comes to the elves,
he's trying to sort of provoke the reader in many respects.
yeah, I mean, how's it go? The elves are wonderful; they provoke wonder. Elves are marvelous; they cause marvels. Elves are fantastic; they create fantasies. Elves are glamorous; they project glamour. Elves are enchanting; they weave enchantment.
Yeah.
Elves are terrific; they beget terror.
They beget terror. When we're talking Pratchett's elves are fairies.
Yes,
They're
they are
the
the Fae.
old-fashioned fairies. They're the Wild Hunt. They're the Aelconic. Yeah. They are the Fairy Queen. They're all the dark, otherworldly elements of fairy folklore made manifest. And it's kind of brilliant. I mean, they are genuinely horrific in
Oh, they're
lots of
terrifying.
ways.
I mean, the entire sequence towards the end of the book with Lady.
Yeah, scary stuff, right?
Come and play, lady.
Scary stuff. What I love about the way Granny Weatherwax describes them, which is they are basically cruel children who would break the world to see what pretty noise it would make.
That's the one. Oh my god, just
love it.
The power of the word.
Yeah.
It's just so good.
It's fabulous, isn't it? You know, that's, and also, I mean, he's also making comment there upon the way elves are generally presented in fantasy fiction anyway, which is, oh, they're blindingly beautiful and otherworldly and blah, 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 blah. What Pratchett is saying is, yeah, in real life, that kind of distinction and separation breeds narcissism and abuse. That's what he's saying. And it's a really brilliant way of introducing that concept into young minds, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the interesting things in both this, in Lords of Ladies and in Small Gods, is as I've kind of continued with life long after reading these books, and obviously from the age I was, these books have stayed in there, and the more the world's horizons have expanded, the more I found Pratchett in the world around me.
Yeah.
And it's this amazing experience, and it's something that I wish I could thank the man for.
Yeah, absolutely.
He laid bare the bones of exploration for me. Not for me personally, that's a really weird thing to say, but he laid the bones bare of exploration for anybody who was interested.
Yeah.
And the trails that you can follow through mythology, through literature, through
politics, through ideology, philosophy, you know?
Well, philosophy is a big one when it comes to Pratchett. I mean, to go back to Small Gods, and I'm going to try my best to not just keep going back to Small Gods.
It's difficult not to, though, isn't it? Because it is just a stunner of a book, right?
But Vorbis in Small Gods, he is my perfect example of fear incarnate.
Yeah.
He is terror. Because he is, much like Lily Weatherwax was, he is doing what he thinks is the right thing, but it's the right thing for him.
Vorbis is the kind of character who you wish could have come up against Granny Weatherwax, because she would have exposed his hypocrisy, wouldn't she? She would have absolutely torn him down, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, Vorbis is a very particular kind of human evil. Which is the evil of absolutism. It's ideological absolutism. It's giving up any regard for individual humanity with preference for maintaining systems and institutions. That's what Vorbis represents. And in that regard, he is the manifest evil of organized religion.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what he is.
But there's an interesting through line that you can go from Vorbis back to Lily Weatherwax, where it's that fear and that inability to let change happen.
Yes.
That you have to nail it down as it is, because this is the way it should be.
This is the way it should be. That there is, for me, I think, that is the most concise statement of what Pratchett regarded as evil in the world. It's the assumption of the way things should be.
Yeah,
That's the
absolutely.
evil. That for Pratchett, that is the definition of evil.
Yeah. There's two ways. There's two types of, I don't want to say villain because that's the wrong word entirely, but there's two types of evil that he portrays in the books.
Yeah.
One is somebody who refuses to let change happen
Mhm.
or wants to return to an earlier time,
Yeah.
as you see with the Carrot books and trying to put the king in place and the
Yes,
depths
of
that those
course.
people go to. Or it's the people who are no longer able to see other people as people and thus treat them as objects, as
Yeah.
things, which is a completely different type of evil, but it's still the same beating darkness that you don't ever want to really experience.
Yeah.
But we do. We see this day in, day out in the real world.
Mhm.
And it is not that somebody woke up one morning being a mustache twiddling bad guy. It is evil by increment. It is evil by step. It is, these people didn't just wake up and go, I am going to be this.
No.
There is a long road that happened before the book that there's always the hints of that shows that they came to this through 100,000 decisions.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because Pratchett he doesn't believe in elemental evil. He doesn't believe in big capital E mythological evil. You will not find Sauron or an equivalent of Sauron in the Discworld, because that's not how the Discworld operates. And it's ironic, given the metaphysics of the Discworld, because the Discworld, being like this magically pliable place, is a place where there are literal manifestations of like elemental evil. There are demons.
Oh yeah. They just want to get on with the day, though, and
But yeah, they're not what you would assume them to be, in the same way that angels aren't. Angels also exist in the Discworld in various different ways, shapes, and forms, as do gods and whatnot. But they are expressions of what people believe them to be. It ultimately all comes down to people and what they imagine and what they believe and what they think. He's a great believer in our abstract states and in nurturing those abstract states in the right way.
I will disagree with you on one point, that he does have big E evil in those books, and that's the form of the auditors. That's the big manifest.
Actually, yes.
Yeah,
and for Pratchett, that the biggest evil is not mythological.
No.
It's ordered. It's systemic. That's ultimately it, isn't it? That's the best word to describe what Pratchett is trying to express through the auditors, which is evil is systemic. If there is big evil in the world, then it's always systemic. It's because systems and the people who operate within them and who parasitically benefit from them are sick, are twisted. And that's what the auditors are.
Well, the auditors are the people who rail against books because children shouldn't read Moss. The auditors are the people that will fight against art, the people who dislike creativism. There's a word there I'm trying to say, creativity. And that there is only the 9 to 5. There is only the dredge of existence. There is not the heartbeat. There is not the butterfly. There is not the love and the song.
It all relates back to what you were talking about before, though, to all the other forms of evil in the Discworld. It's this assumption that systems and institutions and traditions are more important than people.
Yeah, exactly.
That's ultimately it, isn't it? That everything is an engine, and the engine is more important. No matter how sick the engine becomes, that doesn't matter. The engine is more important than the people within it.
Well, look at the patrician, right? Vetinari, right? Vetinari is introduced as the tyrant. One man, one vote. He is the man. He has the vote. Still one of the best fucking jokes I've ever come across in my life.
It is funny. It is very funny.
It's beautiful. But then when you find out what Vetinari is, he himself is only tyrannical because it's the only way to make it work. He is not beheld to what's come before. He is always looking forward. He is always adaptive and changing, and he changes the city around him throughout all the Vetinari that you see and the Ankh-Morpork you see at the beginning of the Discworld are not where Ankh-Morpork and Vetinari are towards the end.
No, Vetinari is... I mean, the original Vetinari is a reference to a really odd, I suppose, in many respects, sort of historical reference to the Medicis and, you know, to that system of politics. But it evolves. It does evolve as the books go on, and as Ankh-Morpork itself evolves and becomes more like a character, I suppose, which it does. I mean, Ankh-Morpork is a brilliant concept. It's this odd melange of city-states. So part of it is Venice. Sort of like 17th century Venice with like the Medicis and, like, you know, that particular politics happening. It's also London. It's very much, but London like in the 1980s. It's really strange in that regard. It's also New York. It's Manhattan. It's Paris to a certain degree.
It's so perfectly built that it's familiar to you no matter where you're from.
Yeah, very peculiar. It's the city, isn't it? It's the Ankh-Morpork is almost like the epitome, the apotheosis of city. Yeah.
Which is very much what it's there to do. It's, I mean, when you look at like Reaper Man and the shopping mall eggs and
what a brilliant concept! What a great notion! I mean, it's just so ridiculous. So ridiculous.
Once I realised what was going on there, I think my head just hit the page and was like, "Oh, for fuck's sakes!"
Again, it's an expression of Pratchett's anger and what's happening, like, in general culture, and one that has, again, really prescient. It's really prescient because it's what happened. It's what's happened, isn't it?
Well, I mean, you want to talk about prescient when it comes to Pratchett's writing. Jesus fucking Christ.
The things he predicts are actually really scary. I mean, the only other, like... He's like Marx in that regard. You know, you read Marx's political writings, you read the Manifesto or you know, basically any of... Capital is what I was trying to think of. If you read Capital, the stuff he predicts about what our systems, our economies, the way our industries and politics are going to go is like, you almost start to believe in psychic powers. You know, you start to believe in precognition. Pratchett's the same for me.
He was a big believer and a big student of sociology. And clearly. And so as a result, he saw the patterns and understood where it was going to lead. And it's a really interesting thing that's happened in the last 6-7 years, that Cheery Littlebottom has become something of a totem for a lot of people, especially for the transgender community. Because this character that has been around for 20 plus years now, she has, I don't even know how to begin to form the sentence that is this big. It's so bizarre and so powerful and so brilliant. But the entire struggle of the transgender community is summed up in the story of Cheery Littlebottom.
And lots of other characters as well. I mean, like, there are a lot of characters in the Discworld who are really fighting against the prescriptions of identity within their societies. I mean, we talked about Esk earlier. She's definitely one. Characters like Angua, of course, is one of those as well. She's a character who is fighting against her identity or the prescription of her identity. There's things like the campaigns for equal rights in Ankh-Morpork, you know? For like...
You mean the dwarf one, the campaign of equal heights?
The campaign for equal heights, of course. There's the undead one.
Yeah, Red Shoe.
Because the undead are they're a minority demographic, of course, and they are generally misliked in Ankh-Morpork for no particular reason. There's just a prejudice against them.
It's Red Shoe is actually a really interesting character to bring up, and he's one that people don't talk about very often because he is both sides of the coin at the same time, and it's freaking genius how he does this.
It's clever, isn't it?
So he is the person who is trying to make change happen for the betterment of his community. But at the same time, he's also the 80s era of protester that's protesting for the sake of protesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting that Pratchett manages to get this fine line to be able to get both sides of that into one character.
Mm-hmm.
I fucking love Red Shoe. I think he's amazing.
He is. I mean, Pratchett is able to do that. He is one of those rare people who's able to imagine and convey the complexities of the situation, but also to make it very clear which side he himself comes down on and why.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
And it's very, I mean, you cannot read these books and not understand that Pratchett is on the side of those who wish to identify however the fucking hell they like.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
He is very much championing the idea that you are the person that you want to be.
Yes.
You are allowed to reinvent yourself in a way that feels comfortable to you. So many... I mean, fucking Magrat.
Yeah, ideologically, that is a through line in almost every book and for almost every protagonist in those books.
Yeah.
It's characters who are that sometimes they're fighting against the prescriptions of fate, sometimes they're fighting against the impositions of a fairy tale, like a story that's literally trying to warp them into being a particular way. In soul music, it's the mythology of rock and roll, of course, the living mythology of rock and roll. That's trying to steer Buddy into a particular towards a particular fate that will sustain it. That's what it's all about. It's protest fiction. That's what Pratchett wrote ultimately. It's protest fiction. It's fiction of, no, I'm not fucking doing that. I'm not being that. I can be what I like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, soul music's a really good one, actually. That's one of my favorite all-time books, and it's the best of the Cosgrove Hall animations.
Definitely.
So if you haven't seen that,
really good. It's a really good. I mean, what makes the Cosgrove and Hall animation is actually genius in many respects, because it does things that Pratchett just couldn't do because of the medium of it being a book. So it introduces these musical jokes about music, like rock and roll history. Which are brilliant. It takes you on this like animated tour of the history of rock and roll.
It wasn't until I saw the animated Cosgrove and Hall version that I got the "we're bigger than cheeses" joke.
Ha! Yeah, and also just the stuff like, I would never have pegged, for example, that Cliff has like a jazz man's voice, right?
Oh,
but that fits so well.
Yeah.
That fits so well, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. And then you have the music that's in that thing, and Jesus Christ, The Passenger it's a
really
work of art.
It's really good. In fact, a lot of the songs are excellent and very clever. Again, given that they are referencing pre-existing pieces of music and pre-existing traditions, you know, and the wonderful linguistic jokes that are in that. I mean, like, you know, Impekel, and what does it mean? I mean, bud of the holly. Yeah, of course, Buddy. Yeah, obviously. Cliff. I can't see someone lasting long in this line with a name like Cliff. Cliff Richard, who's been like alive for, you know, in rock and roll since like the Dark Ages. Really funny. I mean, really funny stuff. And also like the way this happens a lot in the Discworld as well, where reality just bleeds through. Like our reality bleeds through into the Discworld. So you've got like the dynamic of the wizards who are acting like moody teenagers.
Born to ruin.
Yeah. Live fats die yoga nu. That is a brilliant joke.
Yeah.
It's utterly brilliant. And the visual jokes as well, like Death crashing through a rose bush on his motorcycle and catching one in his teeth. I mean, it's like,
the full-blown Meatloaf bat out of hell imagery that they use for Death. That's so good.
It's brilliant. It's utterly brilliant. And taking that, you know, as a concept, it's great. Anyway, again, it's Pratchett acknowledging something that exists in culture, but which is very difficult to articulate, which is this notion that rock and roll was almost like a mythological thing, right? Like a living, vital phenomena.
Yeah, and what he does through soul music is it hits on a couple of different levels, and honestly, if I keep saying that the man was a genius, we're going to be here all day. So we'll just take that as granted and carry on. So what soul music does is it plays with the idea of rock and roll as it was in the 40s and 50s as this thing to be both feared, but also had a massive movement behind it.
Yeah.
It takes the idea of a new movement coming up that people don't understand, and a lot of people get behind, especially younger generations get behind. So you have the 1-2 punch of something that people are getting into that an older crowd and an older generation fear because it's different.
Yeah.
But then it also makes some seriously bloody pot shots. I mean, it bloodies the nose of the idea of the merchandisers, the people who get into that to make money off the backs of other people.
Yeah.
And there are things in there in soul music which I didn't find out about until maybe 6-7 years ago.
Yeah.
Stuff like you never make money back off your first album. You know, you lend the money of the record label to make that album.
Yeah.
There are references to things like that in soul music. The knowledge is staggering.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Again, this intimate knowledge of what he's writing about. So, like the history and the industry, like the industrialization that came off of the back of what was originally a protest and counterculture movement.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. I mean, he does the same thing with moving pictures, with cinema, obviously.
Yes, yeah. But the way he goes through moving pictures, it's a different beast to soul music. Moving pictures often feels to me like a first run at the idea.
Yes, moving pictures is not as successful as soul music.
No.
It's good. Don't get me wrong. It's really good fun. And I love... Is moving pictures the one where he introduces the notion of the dungeon dimensions?
Yes, yeah.
I think it is, isn't it? Because it's certainly the one where it becomes what it will become later. You know, it's basically Lovecraft, isn't it? It's introducing Lovecraft to the Discworld, which is, again, it's showing the man's breadth of experience and influence. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the dungeon dimensions were mentioned in earlier books. You had things like Belham Shammaroth, the horror with 1,000 eyes. Nylonathotep, the laddering horror.
That's brilliant. The laddering horror.
Jesus Christ, like that, man.
Oh my God.
They're always a thing off to one side. Like in Equal Rights, they have the dungeon dimensions are trying to get in.
That's
but
right, yes.
they're not a full part of the story. Moving Pictures brings the idea to the core and explores it. The things that want to get in, the things that feel reality like a moth feels a flame, and they want to get closer to it.
I mean, you actually get some proper Lovecraftian imagery in moving pictures, like tentacles coming through the screen, you know?
It's the giant ginger as she steps out. And then, of course, grabs the librarian, so you've got a giant woman holding a monkey.
Oh, God, that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing. Unless you know, you're not going to find that funny. But if you know, you're really going to find that funny.
That joke continues, though, to a conclusion which blows my mind even now, which is, 'twas beauty that killed the beast. It wasn't. It was that bloody big fall.
Oh, my God. Was there ever a better character than the librarian?
Well, yeah, actually, the Bursar. The Bursar...
the Bursar's good, too.
If I had to... It's a really hard thing to do, because... Vimes is always going to be at the top of a list of favorite characters. Vimes is very much my fucking spirit animal, I think. Vimes is such a powerful totem to follow. You know, you've got Granny Weatherwax, obviously, who an ex-girlfriend of mine always says that Granny Weatherwax is the reason that she got into psychology.
Or headology, obviously.
Headology, but
no, I think Nanny Og is my spirit animal.
Nanny Og's so good.
I love Nanny Og to bits. I think Nanny Og is just like...
The amount of Nanny Og jokes that I didn't get until I was like 18, 19.
Yeah, well, you would hope so, wouldn't you, really?
Jesus Christ. The fucking carrot and oyster pie. Oysters so you can see in the dark, carrots so you've got
My
something to look at.
favorite,
Yeah.
I think one of yes, oh my god, I think my favorite joke that she tells is that one in Witches of Broadway. Again, you've got like a little bit of reality creeping in where they're on their journey, they're on the
Yeah.
broomsticks, and they're just talking, they're just sort of shooting the breeze, and they start talking about how, oh, they could like set up a business where they use the broomsticks to travel people around to different countries and whatnot, and they're talking about what they could call it. And Nanny Og glances at Magrat and glances at Granny Weatherwax, and she says, "We could call it Virgin." And then the
Yeah.
brooms fall out of the air.
Actually, to get into Nanny Og, because well, I'll rephrase that.
Yeah,
Nanny,
do you
yeah,
really want to rephrase that?
Nanny Og's a really interesting character to me because she is the old. Yeah, her best days are well behind her, but she doesn't give two shits.
Oh, she could give a damn about that.
But what he does with Nanny Og is he gives her life time and time again, and then when you think that Nanny Og is pretty much as Nanny Og as she's ever going to get, you get to see the younger version of her when she meets Casanunda.
Yeah,
and oh my god, the fact that Casanunda and Nanny Og have this, I don't know, it's not a love affair.
no,
it's something more respectful and something a lot more personified, you know.
There's a sort of a bizarre kind of professional respect there, given Casanunda's, like, his craft.
The second greatest lover.
Yeah, because actually I think he's met his match in Nanny Og in that regard. Yeah, she's almost like the unreachable, isn't she? She is the very pinnacle of his art, and he will never be able to scale it, right?
Yeah. You've got the wonderful sequence where they're having a romantic dinner. He tries to play footsie. He gets his toes crushed by a hobnailed boot.
It's utterly brilliant. It is utterly brilliant. I mean, his fascination with her, the way he's besotted with her, is the best thing. It's the best thing.
Well, it's really, really beautiful in a way because he doesn't see the old crone woman. No. What he sees is this lust for life, this personality that could fill up a fucking 1,000 jugs. What's the actual saying? A mind so open it could fill 3 football fields. And he doesn't fall in lust, which is what he normally does.
Yeah.
But he does kind of fall in love.
Yeah.
But it's not a love of passion and of heated moments. It's a really wonderful, respected moment where he just likes being around her. He just loves being in her company.
You get the impression that Nanny Og would be like that anyway. I mean, she's like that for the reader, isn't she? She is so great to be around.
Unless she's getting the tin bath out to sing, yeah.
Oh my god, she is utterly brilliant, isn't she? I mean, just a wonderful creation, and I love her dynamic with Esme, with Granny Weatherwax. I think it's brilliant. I think it's utterly brilliant. I like it when they argue.
Yes.
I do like it when they disagree. Let me tell you, my good woman, don't you dare talk to me in that tone of voice. I'm not anybody's good woman. Oh, it's fabulous. It's utterly fabulous.
It's wonderful.
I mean, to be fair to them, those two characters are pretty established. They don't really evolve very much. They don't change very much because they don't need to. They've already gone through it. They know who they are. I love Magrat. I love the way she changes.
The journey of Magrat is, I mean, it goes back to what we were saying before about pushing against the boundaries the world has set against you.
Yes. But also the fiction, right? Because the tendency in this kind of fiction, especially if it's been successful before, is you just write them the same as they always were, right?
Yeah.
He refuses to do that with Magrat. He absolutely refuses. Every book she occurs in, something has happened to make her different.
Yeah. Yeah, she grows continuously, and when she goes from being the maiden to the mother, Yeah, she becomes this force of nature. She takes on the Nanny Og role.
She becomes the Nanny Og role, but she's not. She's different, isn't she? As
Oh,
well,
absolutely, absolutely.
She's like the very best of Granny and Nanny.
Yeah,
like put together,
which is what they always try to do with her, and that's it. It's because they take such pride in what she's become, even though Granny is missing her in a lot of ways by the time she becomes a mother.
Of course.
Yeah, she misses that camaraderie. Camaraderie? That's not how you pronounce that word.
Camaraderie?
That's the one I was trying to aim for. As always, I speak faster than my brain can do. But she misses it, and that's why you get a lot of what happens in the later books.
Yes, of course, when they're trying to put the coven back together again.
Yeah, but then you get Agnes.
Yeah, who's also brilliant, right?
Yeah, Agnes Nitt, who Masquerade may be my all-time favorite Pratchett book, right? Because, well, a load of different reasons. One, it's the witches in Ankh-Morpork, and that is just such a wonderful experience.
Always fun, right? That is always bloody fun. Because what I love about it is they don't adapt to it; they shape it around them.
Yep.
Ankh-Morpork adapts to them.
Yep. But then you get the wonderful Nanny Og going to see the book publisher, and just the different ways he's trying to escape. But then you get the Phantom of the Opera pastiche, which is really good, and also some real fucking deep cuts for opera. Jesus Christ!
Right.
I remember coming across the opera of the Merchant of Venice many years afterwards, and just going, "Oh, for fuck's sake, Salt Cellar, Jesus fucking Christ, Salt Cellar, fuck you." Even now, 5 years after his death, the man is still tripping me up on stuff. It's ridiculous. But anyhow, what he manages to achieve with that is a pastiche from Phantom of the Opera, a wonderful joke set around oh Christ, what's his name? From Some Mothers Do Have Him. The actor.
Yes, Crawford. Michael Crawford.
Yeah, Michael Crawford, who turned from that super scrawny guy in Some Mothers Do Have Him to the very handsome Phantom of the Opera. When he did Phantom of the Opera, he completely changed shape. Became very, very dapper and very well put out. And on top of all that, there is this heartbreaking turnaround. And you get the moment of, you're always wearing the mask. It's an invisible mask, but you can wear it against the world. And it gives him everything he needs in order to be that person.
Yeah, it's a classic Granny Weatherwax moment, isn't it?
It is, but it's so weirdly emotional. Because it is somebody finding their place in the world.
And finding their identity, right?
Yeah,
that seems to be... It's something she does a lot, actually. She does it with Verence, of course, in
Witches Abroad. Weird Sisters.
Weird Sisters, yeah. She I mean, what I love about that one is she makes a mistake. I really like that. I really like the fact that her plan kind of goes awry at the end, Yeah. It doesn't quite turn out how she wants it to. And the reason it doesn't turn out how she wants it to is because she catches herself doing a little bit of Lily.
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah. She catches herself in that. And I love the fact that she sows the seeds of the undoing of her own plan early on. When she does the Sleeping Beauty thing where she gives the child a gift. And her gift is fantastic. It is the best of the three gifts. It's absolutely wonderful. Let him be whoever he thinks he is.
Yeah, which gives him... makes him the greatest actor who's ever lived.
Yeah. But, I mean, what a gift.
Yeah.
What a gift to have no doubt of who you are. To be certain in your identity.
It's interesting, actually, the gifts that the three witches give him in Weird Sisters.
I like the one Nanny wants to give him. Wouldn't that be rather uncomfortable? Oh, he'll thank us for it when he grows up. It's so funny.
Oh, for fuck's sake! The bit in Lords and Ladies where she's explaining Ogham And it's so what does it say? Oh, basically it says I've got a great big tonker. Fucking hell! In the midst of all this freaking mythology, you make a knob joke.
Yeah,
Of course,
which is not. I mean, it's a joke, but it's also redolent of truth.
it is because it's based on the man. What's he called? Is it the Wiltshire man?
Yeah, that's right. And also, I mean, this is what you find. This is actually what you find. It's what archaeologists are endlessly discovering. Like, you know, they're endlessly sort of like, you know, translating ancient hieroglyphics and whatnot. I'm finding that they're fart jokes and knob jokes and whatnot. I mean, it's just like, you know, it's so funny.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my favorite one, to completely go off on a tangent, is a group of guys spent many years trying to decipher this old. I think it was some form of Arabic. I can't remember exactly what it was. And what it basically ended up being was "for a good time" called Janice.
Yes, yeah.
It was. It worked out. It was just somebody had put his wife's name up on the wall.
Yeah, the oldest joke ever recorded was in this ancient Egyptian papyrus, and it took ages and ages to translate, and it's one of the oldest known or recorded jokes in the world, and it's a fart joke. Farts have always been funny. You
Absolutely,
know?
absolutely.
To human beings, they've always been funny. And I love that. There's something very fundamentally human about that. And it's something that Pratchett so gets in his fiction. It's something he just so gets.
Where was I at before we got onto this? So I was going to say something, and I totally.
We were talking about Verence and the gifts that
the three gifts,
the witches give him.
Yeah. So the three gifts, they all come at it from the point of view of this will make him a good king.
Yeah.
But they actually make him a fantastic actor.
Yeah.
And it makes him more suited for the troop than it does for the kingdom, which is why when he is given the crown, he is able to turn it down.
Yeah. In fact, he panics, doesn't he? He panics. He's just not made for it. He's not built for it.
No. And that is such a wonderful thing because it's, in a fairy tale, this is the stuff that would happen. It would be, we give you these gifts and then it comes back at the end and ta-da! But because he's lived a life away from this and all he knows is the traveling acts, the theatre that he's been a part of, he doesn't want to give that up. He wants to stay in his life. And he just, it's such a beautiful, well thought out idea. And then, of course, you have the drug designia.
Of course.
When did you work that one out?
Oh man, that Weird Sisters is one of my favorites of the books. I mean that's because of the Shakespearean stuff.
Yeah.
You know, obviously it's Macbeth. But it's a lot of other things as well. There are Hamlet jokes in there. There are King Lear jokes in there.
Is this a dagger I see before me? No, it's a handkerchief. You can tell because there's less sharp edges.
When shall we three meet again?
Oh, next Thursday be all right.
Yeah, I can do next Tuesday. Yeah, it's utterly brilliant. Yeah, I mean, these books, I mean, I haven't read them for a long time. I haven't been through them for a long. There used to be a time when I used to read the entire canon.
Oh yeah,
every year. It's a difficult thing to do because there's so bloody many.
Yeah, well, there's 40 odd books now, isn't there?
There's a lot to get through there.
At the end, yeah.
What I would probably do is pick out my favorites at this point.
Yeah.
But it's been a while. I should go and do it. I should go and do it again.
Oh, absolutely. I think the best way I've ever heard it described is sinking into a Pratchett book is like giving your brain a warm bath.
Yeah.
You know, it brings just so much comfort, but also recharges a lot of the neurons. Yeah, it's a wonderful experience.
Because you've got to engage, haven't you? I mean, it does ignite all of those old associations, you know, from when you were discovering this stuff for the first time and you'd never read fiction like this before. You'd certainly never encountered fantasy like this before.
No.
But it also remains challenging and ambiguous and won't let you get away with the easy answers, not ever.
No, I mean, look at Carpe Jugulum. You know,
Yeah, I love that one. I love that one.
Yeah, I haven't been vampirized. You've been weather waxed.
Yeah, what a brilliant thing. I mean, that is so brilliant.
You did something to the blood.
I love the notion that the reason vampires are affected by all this stupid traditional stuff is because they believe in it.
Yes. Yeah. The Counting Magpie is such a wonderful idea. Just like, look, see, I myself have walked around in the sun with nothing more than a little bit of sunburn.
The pragmatic vampire.
Yeah. I mean, that is such a... It would take about 20 years for anybody else to come back to that idea.
Yeah.
And and it's a really weird thing. And this happens quite often, actually. There's ideas in the Discworld books, and we are going to stay in the Discworld books, I think, for the most of this, because it was very easy to get out into the other stuff. And to be honest with you, I try not to talk about the Long Earth because that hurts a lot. Yeesh. But there's ideas and concepts that he comes up with, which have only recently started to resurface in other ideas, in other forms of literature and media and fiction. You know, and it's a really weird thing. It's like, well, why is it taking everybody else so long to catch up?
Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, people often say these days, like, well, you know, what with Netflix doing Good Omens and doing The Sandman and whatnot, which is, I mean, there is a lot of overlap between Gaiman and Pratchett, obviously. I mean, they were friends, but they also overlap in other ways as well. Like, their fiction often does very similar things and has a very similar kind of motif about it. Why isn't the Discworld being optioned? And, well, the reason often is that Discworld just doesn't work.
No,
outside of the page. It often just does not work.
Hogsfather worked to a point, and I think that's the best that they've had in the live action. I don't know if you've seen The Watch, but fucking Jesus,
there was no point in it being a Discworld series, The Watch. It's like they took everything out of it that was essentially Discworld. So it's like, well, why not just make it a generic fantasy series then or something?
What really annoyed me about The Watch is that they actually made it less inclusive.
Yes, somehow they managed to make it less inclusive than this book from 20 years ago, you know?
And it really annoyed me. I didn't finish it because... I can even tell you why I didn't finish it. I got annoyed at Cheery. I got really annoyed at Cheery Littlebottom because Cheery Littlebottom, as I said before, she has been a totem for the transgender community in a lot of different ways. But the way that her story unfolds, that she can be anybody who has suffered in trying to find out who they are as a person, right? They cut everything of that out by removing the dwarf, the fact that she's a dwarf. And that really annoyed me. But fuck me sideways if the fact that they made Lady Sybil Ramkin young... Oh, no. Lady Sybil Ramkin is a battleship. She is somebody who is in the later part of her life. She's the person that Pratchett always writes about, the person who has moved past the adventurous stage of life and has moved into the comfort of middle age, or the ill-fitting comfort of middle age in some cases. And it angered me a lot that they made her into a young action hero. Because
absolutely.
It takes away so much of what the character represents.
Totally. And like you said, it makes it less inclusive, right?
It does, because you don't have that feeling of... I mean, going back to the Watch books now, as somebody in their 40s, is a very different experience to reading it when I was in my teens or in my 20s, because I now resonate a lot with what Lady Sybil and Sam Vimes are as people, you know, not as much as characters, but as people. And the lives that they've led that have led them to this point. And it's a sad thing when that emotional weight gets removed from the characters and you no longer see that. The Sam Vimes in The Watch is a fucking idiot. He doesn't have that. I mean, Sam Vimes starts off as a Clint Eastwood pastiche, as all these characters do. They start off as a pastiche, and then the bits get filled in usually through the first book, but then more throughout books later.
As they evolve, and as he gets a greater grasp of what he wants to do with them.
Yeah, and some Vimes is the embodiment of Pratchett's rage against injustice, because Vimes he's the law, but not the law. Yeah, it's not the law as in the way that good men can be punished when bad men can go free.
Yeah.
He is the law in the sense of justice.
He's ethics, isn't he?
Yeah.
That's what Vimes is. He's ethics, and that's why you find him in such a state at the beginning of the Watch books, of course, because he can't operate in this condition. He cannot fulfill his role in the way that he feels he should.
But he cannot fulfill his role in the world because he has such a strong moral center that has been eroded from all sides by living.
Of course, and he needs someone like Carrot to come along and remind him of what he's supposed to be, of the ideals that he once had.
Oh, God, I love Carrot.
Me too. Me too. I really like Carrot.
The subtlety in Carrot, it's a really interesting one, actually. I've said that so many times in this recording.
Well, it is a thing in Pratchett's work. You've got to acknowledge it. It is a thing.
Yeah, Carrot is probably the most subtle character that Pratchett writes, because at no point does Carrot come forth and say, yes, I know that I'm meant to be king, but I'm not going to do it. He always finds ways of being 2 steps removed from that sentence.
Yeah.
And it shows you the sheer intelligence that Carrot has. I mean, crying out loud, last year I was rereading Feet of Clay. And was it Feet of Clay? I think it was Feet of Clay. I can't remember. I was rereading the Watch books anyhow. And I came across the bit at the beginning where Carrot stops a burglar. A series of burglars from robbing Strong in the Arm's bakery.
Yep.
And it's Strong in the Arm does the quintessential sentence of, oh, this is disgusting, there shouldn't be this much crime, I pay my taxes. And Carrot zones in on that sentence. And as always, it's 2 steps removed from saying, you don't pay your taxes and I'm going to catch you for that.
Yeah.
And he very friendly, very helpfully says, oh, we haven't had any tax returns from you. I'll come and help you do them later, shall I?
There is often a sense with Carrot that he's smarter than he wants other people to believe that he is.
Oh, yeah. He has purposely put out a facade of himself as being big, helpful, and a little bit simple. But the reality is there is an intelligence like a piston behind that brain.
Yeah, definitely.
And it allows him to very, very subtly move things around so people are either safe or the right people are in the right place to be caught.
Right place. Yes, it's very clever. I love his relationship with Angua. I think it's brilliant.
Oh, yeah. You think they'd have puppies?
I just think it's awesome. I like the fact that through that, Carrot gets over one of his own prejudices.
Yes.
Which is great, right?
Yeah. He understands and learns. And
that's Pratchett, of course, having a go at like D&D morality systems as well.
Oh, yeah.
Werewolf, classically evil. Carrot, barbarian, classically sort of hero, chaotic good. Wouldn't get along.
It's an interesting thing, actually. Pratchett knew a lot of this stuff off by heart. He was a big gamer. He was a massive gamer. He
clearly.
I can't remember the exact story, but there's a thing for one of the Elder Scrolls games where he had mentioned on a message board somewhere that it would be helpful to have somebody who was there to remind him of stuff. And somebody in the production side of things created the character, and it wasn't till many years later that people realized that the person in this message board was Pratchett.
Oh, brilliant. How superb.
The fact that he was there on message boards, and he wasn't really hiding himself, but he was just talking to everybody as normal.
That's awesome. That's wonderful stuff. But no, it was clear that he is a gamer from his other work, from the work where he does deal with video games. Because he's one of the very few writers of his generation who are operating in these genres and with his intended audience who actually did understand video games and video game culture.
Absolutely, absolutely. And not only in something like Only You Can Save Mankind, he took hits, he made shots, I should say, at video game logic in various books. You know, the amount of jokes made about the questing adventurers and stuff like that. I mean, freaking guards, right? When they all the barbarians and stuff come to the city in order to kill the dragon because it's the quest.
Yes, it's what happens, right?
Yeah. And the reality is that Ankh-Morpork is a city that doesn't have much money. So, all right, well, it's got a dog. It's got a dog called Wuffles. They start bargaining, like trying to bargain some kind of deal out of this. Well, it's not really worth it, is it? Because
so funny.
There isn't any gold here. And
so you can't pillage, right?
Yeah, it takes a direct pot shot at the idea of game quests and stuff like that. It's such a well thought out idea that once again gets absolutely obliterated on contact with reality.
Yeah, it's very, very clever stuff. It's what he does, right? He is unable to keep himself from asking the obvious questions. I mean, have you ever watched the interviews with him where he talks about where Discworld came from?
Oh God,
the initial conception, where he talks about how, you know, when he was young, he read Lord of the Rings, obviously, and one of his initial thoughts from it was, well, what about the orcs that are left in Mordor? There must be like orc families in orc holes. There must be like, you know, baby orcs and orc mothers out there whose narrative is completely the inverse of the one we're presented with.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know?
And you see that with the goblins when they make an appearance. These poor, sad little creatures whose entire lot in life is to be downtrodden.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I know that he never really spoke about it that much, but he was quite disparaging about Harry Potter, wasn't he? He was quite and quite right. I mean, there's a lot of these sort of like old fantasy writers, like Ursula K. Le Guin, like she was too. He regarded it as mean-spirited and immoral. You know, it's like and he's absolutely right. You know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He's absolutely right when you read those books, and you know, I will give myself a little feather in my cap that I was talking about this when I was like 19, before Rowling came, you know, before anything was known about Rowling's wider politics and whatnot. But those books are really mean-spirited. They are, in many respects, the inverse of everything Pratchett was trying to do.
Yeah, they are, because it's the main issue I've got with the Harry Potter books. Well, first of all, my main issue is they are not well written.
No, that's the one thing, and I know that sounds really snobbish, but it is true.
It is. They are. It is
true. They are bollocks written in terms of their the technicality. They are so bad.
Well, the best way to describe it is it might as well be Garth Marenghi's idea of I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
yeah, right.
Because there is no subtlety to anything in those books. It's just this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened.
That's it, isn't it? That is the best way of describing like the way they work technically. They are those stories which are and then this and then this and then this, and there's nothing underneath. I mean, what bothers me about the Potter books is their politics more than anything. It's the fact that you have this world which is, first of all, it's a world of privilege. So people are just born witches and wizards, which I fucking hate. I hate that anyway. Immediately you've got a class distinction. In occult and mythological terms, I hate that too. For me, magic should be a craft, right? It should be something that you can learn. It's something that you can actually work with and learn. Third of all, you've got the separation of the wizarding world from the real world. So magic is just a toy in this world.
Yes.
It's not used for anything. One child from Hogwarts, one particularly gifted child, can solve almost all the economic and like housing and the environmental and hunger problems in the wider world. One particularly gifted child. They don't do that. They just sit in their own hermetically sealed world. But that hermetically sealed world is a world of horrors. Just established, institutionalized horrors that are just allowed to be because that's the way things are. Right?
Well, if you consider it, you're sending your child to a place which has instant death that could happen at any point.
Yeah.
And everyone's okay with this.
Yeah, everyone's fine with it. You've got institutionalized slavery. You've literally got like a species that is born to be a slave. And the way the books portray that is it literally uses the argument that actual slavers used. Oh, they enjoy being slaves.
Yeah.
It's what they want to be. And the character that tries to create a civil rights movement against that is ridiculed in the books, not just by the characters, but by the author.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, it's an interesting one too, isn't it? Where we just spoke about the goblins in Discworld, who are. There is a part of me that wonders how much of reading Potter brought the goblins to the fore in the Discworld, because they are that slave race, that downtrodden race.
Well, what Pratchett does with the goblins is he acknowledges that they are an anti-Semitic trope, and they have been an anti-Semitic trope since they were first conceived in fantasy, you know?
Yeah.
And he tries to undo that. You know, he tries to pick that apart, as any right-thinking person would. Rowling doubles down on it.
Yeah.
And presents them as the worst kind of anti-Semitic stereotype you could possibly imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not good.
It's not great, is it? It's not great.
Well, let's do a one-to-one comparison here. I don't want to spend too much time just pissing on Potter, because
it's easily done, and people have done it like really comprehensively, really comprehensively.
I also don't want to spend too much time thinking about it, to be honest. It's a waste of energy in a lot of ways. But
in many respects, although it is interesting to think on a cultural level, isn't it? Like, you know, you have Pratchett, who's done all of this work to undo all of these problems and assumptions within the traditions of fantasy. Then you get someone like Rowling who comes along and immediately reestablishes them.
Yeah, that's because in a lot of ways it's easier to fall back into old modes of thinking than it is to combat them.
That's true.
Which is one of the main through threads of Pratchett's work, is to combat those old ways of thinking, because they're not always the correct way to go. Now, you do a one-by-one comparison, which is the first Harry Potter book, which came out, 96, something like that?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's all I remember is I was past 16, and I know that because I had an upstairs bedroom, and I know I had an upstairs bedroom because I read the first half of that book and then found how far it could fly out of my window.
Yeah, likewise. I remember coming to like the Harry Potter books and thinking, oh, I might like these, you know? And no.
Yeah,
I remember having arguments in high school with people who did like them.
I just, no. I mean, the main thing I came away from them was just going, well, this is just the worst witch, but shit.
Yeah, it's the worst witch, right? That's the other thing. This has been done a million times before and done better.
Yeah. But one-by-one comparison.
Yeah.
Potter and Esk, because that's the closest you can get.
Yeah.
Right? There's probably some other characters that you could do there as well, but I'm thinking that they're the closest to the one-to-one. The journey that Esk takes has more personal stakes and has more personal growth in that one book
than Potter has in the entire 7-book series, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And it's way more revolutionary as well.
Yeah.
It's way more revolutionary for the world. Like at the end of Harry Potter, everything that's bad about the wizarding world is just reestablished. You go back, it's the ultimate liberal hack book in that regard. You know, everything that's status quo is good because it's status quo. And that's it. And so therefore it's reestablished at the end. I mean, for fuck's sake, Potter becomes a cop at the end. The ultimate guardian of the status quo. Esk is a revolutionary. You know, who basically undoes centuries of assumption and tradition within the wizarding world of the Discworld.
And it's interesting because Pratchett doesn't then open the next book with women are now allowed at the university, because the university is a group of old snoring men who desperately do as much. And don't get me wrong here, I love the wizards.
Me too. I think they're great.
Oh yeah, but they represent that old snoring beast that hates change.
Yeah.
Now, the only difference is that throughout the books, the wizards become more adaptive to change and more absorbent to change because they've allowed one change to happen, and it snowballs, and thus they get like lightning rods for all these weird and wacky moments, like the fucking Veruca fairy.
The beast that eats socks.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love the Veruca fairy. Him and Bilious,
so funny. It's so bloody funny. I love
him
it.
and Bilious, the oh god, the oh god of hangovers.
Oh god, Bilious, you poor creature. Can you even imagine?
Your entire existence is there to have the hangover that the other gods don't have.
God, I like it when Bilious meets people who drink.
Yeah.
And gets angry. I love that. That makes me smile to the nth degree. I think that is so damn funny.
Right. What time? I think we're actually coming up to.
No worries. I mean, if you would like, we can continue this one at a later date.
I think
maybe a sequel. Like an up. We can actually continue this because I think there's a lot more to delve into here.
Absolutely, there is, and I would really like to get James that I did the Creeks with in because he is of the same cloth.
Yeah.
Where Pratchett has helped shape a lot of his mind and his thinking, but I think this is probably going to be a part of an ongoing series. Where
I think that's probably a likely outcome.
Where we kind of cycle back to talking about Pratchett in different ways. I think
because we've hardly touched on the Death books.
I know, it's weird, isn't it? I mean, the Death books, the sheer amount of pathos
they're the sweetest ones.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
They are the most touching of the Discworld books. I find anyway. I love it when Death gets emotional.
Yeah.
I love it. I don't know why. I just love it. I think he's a very sweet guy. I think he's a very sweet character in the Discworld. I really do.
He's a lot of the what you want after death, isn't it? So the Grim Reaper, whilst looking all horrific, being a skeleton, as Danny Ogg says, I've touched worse. At least these have never had flesh on them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, these bones have never had flesh on them. He ends up being a cipher almost for humanity's emotional states.
Yes, I really like that. I mean, one of my favorite books involving him is Reaper Man. And I love it when you get Azrael, like the death of deaths, the ultimate death. And he's like, what are you rebelling against, little Death? And Death is like, well, what have you got?
But not just that. We talked before about how Pratchett had a rage. And the new Death wearing a crown.
Oh, he hates it, doesn't he? He really gets angry at that.
A crown I never wanted to rule. And I remember the line, he unfolded like the wrath of kings.
Yeah.
And it is, oh my God, put a pin in it because it's perfect.
Yeah, it's really good stuff, isn't it? It's really good stuff.
It is it's one line. And I haven't read Reaper Man in probably about 6 years.
No, I haven't read Reaper Man for a long time. Is Albert around at that point? He is, isn't he? Albert is around at that point. I don't think yes, we have found out that he's Alberto Malik, haven't we, at that point?
No.
Have we not? The ultimate wizard, the founder of Unseen University.
No, it's in Mort that you find that out.
Is that in Mort?
Yeah.
Bloody hell, what a revelation.
Yeah.
What a revelation.
Yeah, this old man that's just there cooking bacon.
He's not just an old man, he's a scummy old man as well. Yes. He's like he's just horrible, isn't he? He's just like filth and
But then that makes perfect sense when you think about what the wizards were at that point.
Actually, it does make sense. And where he is, obviously, I mean, he wouldn't have been able to access Death's realm were he not that guy, So, it makes sense. It does make sense. Anyway, I'm sure we will get onto this when we come to talk about them.
Absolutely will. I think there's a lot of stuff when it comes to the Discworld where you can spend hours upon hours, and many people have, where you can just spend all day getting into it. So I think what would actually be probably a good way of doing it is we do this as a series over the next year or so.
Yeah.
And we kind of take it series by series, maybe.
That's a good idea. Series by series, I think, is a great way of doing it, because that, it gives us some boundary, but at the same time, it's not too specific.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's going to be the way to do it. So I want to finish with this quote, and it is, I started out reading a fantasy novel, a simple police procedural in a city far away that straddles an old, slow river. But no, it was about ethics. It was about knowing the difference between what's allowed, what's legal, and what's right, and that fairly often those three don't line up. Or it was about gender politics, about the first person in a society willing to step forward and say, you called me by this name and this pronoun all my life, but that isn't me, this is me. No, we don't even have that pronoun yet, but this is still me. Or it was about racism, the constant social whine of, well, everybody knows what they're like. The blame game that's based on the whispered mutterings that can never have a source, and always boil down to, I'm terrified because they are different. I'm terrified because when I look at them for a second, I can see myself in their eyes, and if I was wrong, then all I've said and done. It was about giving voices to the voiceless and hearing how much they've been trying to say this whole time. It was about what it means to be human. I always started out reading a fantasy novel when it comes to Pratchett, and somehow it ends up in a moral philosophy lesson from a professor with a grasp of humanity that still leaves me astonished. And I don't think there's any more perfect way to describe it than that.
No, I mean, that's a brilliant summation of what Pratchett is ultimately about, I think.
You can tell that it's good because I'm fighting down a bit of emotion while talking.
Yeah,
when reading that one out. Because at the end of the day, oh God, I'm turning to my dad by saying that. The man himself may be gone, but the lessons that he taught and the viewpoints that he shared and the bones of exploration, as I like to call it, are still there.
Yeah, very much so. I would urge anyone who maybe grew up with Harry Potter and is maybe feeling lost these days because they've lost it, or they've been betrayed by that. Go and read Pratchett. Go and read Pratchett. You'll find something better. You'll find something more worthwhile.
You'll find something with a lot more substance and things that you can take on to day-to-day life, and that's the important part. So I'm going to end this now as I started it. GNU Terry Pratchett, and we will see you next time. Good night.
Bye-bye.